Hey everybody, it's Adam from the Army Painter here, and I'm very excited to introduce a new character for a new product line that we're working on called Gamemaster. Freya Caldwell is a human female warrior, a bit aggressive and sometimes a little bit drunk. She may have the appearance of the angel, but she's anything but angelic once she opens her mouth. In this adventure-ready tutorial, we're going to show you how to paint up Freya or your human female warrior to a perfect tabletop standard so you can get ready for your next adventure. Let's take a look at some of the paints that we're going to be using today. Once you've gathered your paints, go ahead and get yourself some clean rinsing water. Maybe you want to use a wet palette and your favorite brush, and let's get started. I gave the model of Color Primer Desert Yellow. This is going to help us out with the golds later on, and I'm just going to start by blocking in the eyes with a bit of Lawful White. Once that's been blocked in, I'm not worrying too much about painting inside the lines here. I'm just taking a little bit of the Lich Blue and I'm going to add a little bit of a pupil. I figured our fair skin, fair hair beauty would look really nice with bright blue eyes. Now I'm going to Flump Pink. This is going to be our base skin tone, and you could see why I wasn't so worried about painting outside the lines while painting in the eyes with Lawful White, because I'm just going to take this to redefine the eyes and also base in the skin. I'm using very thin down paints, and I'm going to give this 2 very light passes. Next, I'm using Ancient Mummy. This is another one of the D&D Nolzur's Marvelous Pigments paints, and I'm using this to add as a base tone for her hair. I've thinned this down quite a bit on my wet palette. I love using my wet palette because it keeps my paints nice and smooth. So I'm just going to add one very simple coat as this applies very smoothly and gives me great coverage over top of that desert yellow base coat. I'm going to block in the pants or the tights that Freya is wearing. I'm using Lich Blue again. I'm trying to emulate the artwork that John Gallagher did for this model, and I'll be showing you what that artwork actually looks like a bit later on in this tutorial. So I'm just taking my Lich Blue and I'm going to apply this in 1 or 2 very thin coats. I don't want to obscure any of the detail on the model. You can just assume that I'm going to be applying 2 thin coats for all applications, just like I'm doing here. Just 1 very thin down coat, and then I'll go back and give it another pass once it's had time to dry. Now moving on to Dragonfire Red. This is a nice rich red tone, and I'm going to apply this all over the skirt and the rest of the clothes that isn't armor on Freya. I'm going to give this 2 thin coats, of course, because I want to preserve all of the detail and have a really rich, solid base tone. This is base coating 101. I'm going to move on to painting all of the leather areas, and because there's so much that is leather on this model, I'm going to be working in 3 different shades of brown. I'm going to start with the darkest tone here. I'm using Rigid Leather from the D&D Underdark paint set. I really love this very rich, almost chocolatey brown. So I'm just going to use this to base in some of the leather areas on the model, like her wrist guards here, and I'm also going to apply this to her boots. I'm going to apply this very smooth, and the reason that I'm applying this again in thin coats is I don't want to obscure any of the detail, and this is a great example here. There's some nice filigree and decoration happening on her boots. I don't want to obscure any of that because we're going to come back later on and block that in with a different color. This should go across all of the boots and the armor on the model that you're painting up, and apply a very smooth coat of your rigid leather. All right, now I'm taking a bit of Dungeon Gray and I'm just going to apply a very simple application, 1 coat most likely, to this drinking horn. Yeah, this is fitting for Freya. We do know she likes to fight hard, but she likes to play even harder. She's a bit of a party animal, and I think she might even have some Viking heritage. I can't quite be sure. So I'm going to apply this Dungeon Gray to the drinking horn here, and I'm also going to use this I think I'm just going to apply this to the tips of her boots. Based on John's artwork, I think this is a nice match and a good starting point for it. So very simply, I'm just going back to my palette now. I'm going to apply 1 or 2 very thin coats to the tips of her boots here. I'm sticking with the D&D Nolzur's Marvelous Pigments theme here. I'm using Owlbear Brown, and I'm just going to find some other leather bits that I'd like to base in with this color. I may have thinned this down just a little bit too much on my palette, if I'm being honest, and that's okay, because I am going to apply a second thin coat over top. I'm just going to apply this to all of the other leather bits that I didn't base in our rigid leather. So just very carefully, careful not to obscure any of the areas that you've previously painted in Lich Blue or even your Dragonfire Red and Rigid Leather. You just want to get a nice, smooth, and clean application here. Base coating in these Adventure Ready tutorials, this part is all about painting inside the lines, painting by numbers here, just very carefully getting a nice, smooth, even base tone across the entirety of the model. You're really prepping it for the washing step, which is going to bring out more detail later on. So just very simply go around the rest of the model, find the areas that you would like to paint in Owlbear Brown, and give it a nice smooth coat. Come back once it's dry and apply a second coat. Just decided to take a little break from painting browns. We will come back to paint in a few more. Sometimes I like to do this, it just keeps things interesting for me. I'm taking a bit of orc skin and I'm applying this to the tarp that she has, this piece of cloth that she has wrapped up in her adventure pack on her back. So I'm just very carefully, and again, I'm sounding like a broken record here, but I'm using very thin down paints because there is a bit of detail here, especially on this spiral bound area of the tarp that she has back here. I don't want to obscure any of that. I don't want the paint to clog up and dry in there. So use very thin down paints and allow the viscosity of the paint to help work its way into the recesses, almost like a wash. You don't want it to be that thin down. And same thing here on the base. I'm just going to apply a very, very thin coat. Allow the paint to, in a controlled manner, work its way into the details. So I'm going back to my browns. This time I'm using Bugbear Brown. I'm going to paint in some of the straps on the model, like these boot straps here, and just find the rest of the areas like the filigree that we were talking about before. I'm going to go ahead and use this to pull out those details very carefully here. I'm using a small detail brush from the Army Painter Wargamer brush range just to pick out these details. It's very simple when you're using thin down paints. It gives you more control over the paint when you're painting in these smaller details. Moving on to paint all of the metallics here, I'm using Kyron Gold, and I'm going to use this to pick out some of the metallic details on the model, most specifically the breastplate that she's wearing, this chest plate, because in John Gallagher's artwork, that's how he envisioned her. So I'm going to follow this as best I can. These models aren't a 100% match. These are custom models that we had made for us, but they are very, very close. So I'm doing my best to match the artwork here. I'm just going to apply one simple application. We did use Color Primer Desert Yellow, and that is the perfect base tone for painting golds. Very carefully, I've thinned this down, and I'm just going to paint over the shoulder pads that she's wearing here, the shoulder armor, and give it a nice solid base coat. I'm going to finish off all of the metallics using Mithril Silver. Most specifically, I'm going to focus on this belt buckle here. There's also some rivets in the armor and on her loin armor there, and this little piece of, there's a little ornament here on her chest plate that I want to just differentiate from the rest of the armor in silver. And of course, all of the models that you're going to be seeing in this series have a ring, and I think that's really cool because it ties them all together. So I'm going to go ahead and base that in with Mithril Silver. In later installments of this Freya series, I'm going to show off how to paint a glowing power sword effect. But first, I need to have a nice solid base tone of silver on this blade. So I'm just going to take a bit of mithril silver, and I'm going to give this 2 thin coats because it is such a flat pattern. I don't want that paint to streak on this flat piece of the model. So just 2 very thin coats, and we'll come back for the next steps. It's been a really fun experience developing the characters to go along with this new product release that we are working on called Gamemaster. And we had the pleasure to work with a very talented, well-known artist named John Gallagher. Now, he helped us with some of the designs of these characters, so let's hear what he had to say about Freya.
So the interesting thing about Freya in the aquarium of characters and character classes, there's always something that kind of strikes right to the base, kind of lowest common denominator, not to diminish any of the others or elevate them, but just in terms of the Dungeons and Dragons experience, the sword and sorcery experience, the human warrior, because again, we're vain enough to believe we're the center of everything as humans, and that warriors are the thing that's most, perhaps, that magic users maybe are most associated with sword and sorcery. So the best part about that, of course, is you get to draw a fierce warrior, and what's even more exciting about that, of course, is a fierce female warrior who are every bit the equal of males, of course. I don't think any fantasy fan worth their salt would have the temerity to think otherwise. That Freya is every bit the equal of every male warrior, and so I wanted to convey that in terms of her fearlessly charging into battle against, in the illustration, it's a beholder who, they're no slouch. If you know anything about beholder kin, they are terrifying as an adversary. And there she is, just charging right in, full speed ahead with no hesitation too.
I hope you enjoyed hearing that bit of feedback from our friend John Gallagher. It's really cool to learn a bit about what was going through his head as he developed these characters for this new product line we are calling Gamemaster. We're very excited to tell you more about it real soon. You'll have to stay tuned. So we've added all of our base tones to the model. We've base coated everything, and the next step in our Adventure Ready tutorial is to apply a wash. And this washing step really brings out the details and definition and pushes the contrast on the model. You very simply apply it over top of the base tones. I'm using Flesh Wash over top of all of the golds. It's a very nice color to wash over top of gold colors. We're also going to use this, of course, to wash the skin tones as we've previously done, and this very nice blonde hair we previously base coated in Ancient Mummy. So just go around the model, find all of the gold metallics, all of the flesh tones, and of course the hair, and add this wash, and just watch right before your eyes as the definition comes back and starts to take shape. And now before we apply our final wash, I do want to give all of the metallic bits just a quick wash with Shadow Wash. So I'm just going to apply almost like a simple pin wash. I'm just dabbing it around these little rivets that she has here, and of course the belt buckle. And I'm also going to use this color to wash down the blade of the sword, and also anything that we previously painted in blue and gray, like the pants, like this scabbard here for her dagger. And I'm going to use this over top of the base to really bring out the definition of the cobblestones as well. It's important to remember that when you're working with a wash, it is designed to pull in the recesses, but if you are a little heavy-handed, it will drastically pull in some of the deeper recesses, and you don't want that to happen too much. You don't want it to pull up so much that you're obscuring any of the areas that you've previously painted. So go ahead and with the tip of your brush, just go ahead and wick it away. You can dab it off on some paper towel if need be. Just make sure you go around the model, and before it dries too much, make sure it's not pulling too much in the recesses. And now moving on to the final step in this tutorial, I am using our brown wash from the Nolzur's Marvelous Pigments range. This is very similar to our Quick Shade Strong Tone. If you don't have the D&D paints and you do have our Army Painter Quick Shade range, go ahead and grab your strong tone or your brown wash and apply this to all of the red areas and of course the leather areas on the model. Give it a good solid coat. You want to coat the backpack, the crossbow, of course, the wrist guards here that we painted in bugbear brown and rigid leather. Just give it a nice solid coat, and you can go over all of the metallics as well that we previously washed with shadow wash, that nice rich black wash. That's why we applied it first, because we're going to apply this over and it's going to seamlessly blend those two together. It's just going to add a little bit more definition because we're applying two coats with two slightly different colors over top of those metallic rivets and the belt buckle. So just take your time here, go around all over the brown leather bits on the model and apply this very smooth wash, and just watch the details, especially here on the filigree on the boot, really come back to life. Getting your model adventure ready is actually very simple, and you can see that we have a very nice result with just simple base coats and washes applied. Now your model is ready for its next dungeon adventure. We have 2 more videos coming up where we will level up and take this model to master class, so stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed this adventure ready tutorial as much as I enjoyed painting up this model for you today. Remember that you can find all of the paints used in this tutorial at your friendly local game store, from your favorite online retailers such as Amazon, or at www.thearmypainter.com. Tune in next time where we're going to be painting up a level up version of Freya. Remember that the magic in miniature painting is that it can be as simple or as challenging as you'd like it to be, but with the right techniques, you're sure to achieve some great results. We'll see you next time.